Howdy, y'all. Hello, everybody. Yeah, okay, all right. We are in the book of Esther, chapter 2. And Santa Claus is back with us again. I will say one more thing about this, and then I'll move on forever. Y'all ready? All right, so George, have you heard anything about the idea of Queen Vashti being summoned to wear her crown? Oh, well, this up or down, left or right? Yes? Okay, that's what I thought. All right, moving on forever from that topic. All right, chapter 2, verse 1. So we have this beauty pageant being held, we would call it. We have Queen Vashti being, essentially exiled. She's no longer queen. And so the idea from the servant of the king of the Medo-Persian Empire was to hold a beauty pageant to call the most beautiful young ladies available to find himself a new queen. There is a whole lot to say about that particular concept by itself, right? In this particular culture, we're looking at this through our eyes, and we see some obvious inequality between the genders here. And we see women being prizes and trophies and objects, and that's not quite in line with the ideal that God designed from the beginning. If you go back to Genesis chapter 2, for example, and you look at the creation of man and woman, that's not in the recipe at all. And so we're looking at a culture here that evolved from the ideal in the beginning in the garden to what it has been in this culture and other cultures around it for a very long time. And we see that God is able to use people living in a fallen state, living in an unideal cultural worldview of people and their value and their worth. And despite all of that, God's plan, God's will is going to be done through it. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So if he can use a culture as base as that, surely we can see some value of God working in our culture as well. Not perfect by any means, maybe a little bit better in some areas, maybe worse in others, if we want to get down to it, but God's will is still going to be done. Okay, so Esther chapter 2. Any questions before we jump into it? We've got some new faces for the book of Esther, so I want to give you a chance to speak now, forever hold your peace. Which, by the way, you don't want to ever say at a wedding. It's a cultural thing that you'll see on TVs and movies, but you don't actually say that line because you don't know what you're opening up when you say, speak now, forever hold your peace. It's not a good move. All right, chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus, so Ahasuerus in this language is also known as Xerxes, important to know. So Darius or Darius, whatever you want to call, his father was the first one of the Medo-Persian Empire, and then you have Ahasuerus or Xerxes. Remember the first chapter dealt with a huge party that went on for like half a year, and everyone's just not compelled to drink, so they're not saying everyone just get loaded here. They're just trying to say we're going to celebrate how great we are, which is always a great thing to do when you're king of the world, right? I say as a sarcastic joke. Hopefully that's clear. And then we have 7 days of him with everybody else, called Queen Vashti out. She says no thanks, and then she's kicked out. He's mad about that. So when the king Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. It was almost like he kind of sobered up a little bit and was thinking more seriously about the issue. And he's like, yeah, that probably wasn't my finest hour as king of the Medo-Persian Empire, but here we are. And the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, And let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem and Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given to them. I mean, to me, that's the way it's phrased there in the English is a little bit funny, because this is more than just like, give her some L'Oreal or Maybelline or what's the makeup brand? What? A makeup brand? I don't. Yeah, all those. Yeah. What's the place you go to buy them? Ulta, that's the one. Let's go to Ulta real quick and make a shopping list, and we'll get them what they want. No, it's just like a serious kind of deal for them, because if you win the competition, which is again a terrible thing to say just culturally and at the value of women here. If you win the competition, you get to be at least a concubine of the king, which I guess is good. I guess. And then if you're actually promoted to be a queen, then you get a lot of power. So this is a pretty important thing for whoever is in this dynamic. Again, there's just so much wrong with this coming from the perspective of what God created a woman to be. Hopefully that's clear. Is that not clear? Everybody got it? Yeah. Not good, but this is the narrative. This is the story. Okay. All right. And let the young woman please the king, be queen, the king, be Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. All right. So we're kind of panning back from the overall narrative concept here. You got all the events of chapter 1. You have the kind of intro to what's going to be taking place very soon in chapter 2, parts 1 through 4. And then you've got verse 3. You're kind of, from that panned out view of the whole situation, you're zooming in to a particular family, which is, again, what we see biblically taking place a lot of the time. You have the overall narrative or structure of the story, of the context, if you will. I've heard that word context so much that I'm trying to find other ways to say it. So you have the overall situation, story, that's kind of panned out, and then you zoom in, right? So imagine, for example, some more times that this takes place, just to kind of be aware of it. You got Genesis chapter 1. That's the panned out kind of panoramic view of creation, right? Of God being powerful, speaking things into existence. And then in chapter 2, you have a retelling of man being created, which has already taken place at the end of chapter 1, but we're zooming in, if you will, to kind of see that creation process for what is man and kind of what its role is, and then what is woman and what her role is. So we kind of zoom in there in chapter 2. Chapter 3, you zoom even more into one scenario that they find themselves in. Also, Genesis, a lot of it, but if you go to chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, you were panned out in chapter 11. You have families and who's who and who made who and who begot who, right? All those famous genealogies. And then in chapter 12, from that panned out view, you zoom in to a guy named Abram. So we're taking all of mankind and zooming into one guy, right? His family line, and he's later Abraham. So father of many nations, doesn't have any kids, which is just, that's God through and through. He's going to give you a name that you don't look like whatsoever, but you will become what he named you later, right? So interesting. So this is one of those situations where we're kind of panned out, empire-wide. Zoom in, verse 5. There was a Jew in Susa the citadel whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. So we kind of know who this guy is based on where he came from, right? So in a similar kind of way in our culture today, if I want to know more about you, I might say, where are you from? Where are you from, Anita? Axon, Georgia. So you're a Georgian. Is that right? Is that how you say it? A Georgian? Georginian? Georgian? That's right? Okay, I thought so. If you ask me where I'm from, where am I from, Tom? Virginia. No, the elders have a good joke going these days that I'm from the Middle East. They think it's hilarious. I'm still on the fence about it. Blaine loves it, so I guess it's going to stick. So from the middle of the east coast of the United States is Virginia. So I'm from the Middle East. Well, you know. So this is a kind of an idea of what Mordecai is all about. We know where he comes from, what his line is. He's a Benjamite. Some other famous Benjamite you may be aware of is King Saul, for example, back in the day, before this whole thing took off on the history. So you kind of get an idea of where he's from. Let's see, verse 6, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So again, remember the conversation last week if you were here. We have Assyrian Empire. They weren't great, to say the least. They took the northern tribes away captive, at least the leaders anyway. And you have them trying to go and take Jerusalem and Judah. That didn't take place. They woke up dead, right, as the Bible said. And then you have the Babylonian Empire coming into power over the Assyrians, and they were the ones that took away captives. So the Babylonian Empire then was taken over by which empire? Medo-Persian, right? So Medo-Persians come in, and then what comes next? This guy named Alexander came in and whooped everybody. So you have the Grecian Empire, if you will, the Hellenists. And then you've got, of course, Rome. So you kind of have that kind of transition of power all the way through Scripture. Okay, verse 7. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. Pause right there. Again, we don't have any detail about what took place here. This is a thing that happened when they were carried away into Babylon. Is it a thing that happened while they were taken away into Babylon? Like they were there and then it took place? We don't have any details. But that she is being reared up by Mordecai, her uncle, says a kind of a good deal about the kind of family dynamic they would have had and how close they would have been because of this circumstance. Okay, thoughts about that? No thoughts? That's what I love in my classes, no thinking. Yeah, families should do that, right? Take care of each other because they're related, at the very least. All right. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Now, of course, in this context, it's important to show in the middle of these sentences why she matters to the story. And for the purposes of this narrative, of this story, she happens to be a very attractive young woman. That would be important because, wouldn't you know it, the emperor of the empire is looking for a new wife. So can you put two and two together? Got it. So when the king's order and his edict was proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa the citadel in the custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put into custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. Now, the phraseology here in the English seems almost like it wasn't really her choice to be a part of this competition. She was taken also. That's just a kind of a grammatical way of putting it in the English where it's close to the Hebrew, but it's not quite the inference. So we might read into that, for example, by the English, that she was maybe taken by force. Doesn't seem to be present in the original, just for what it's worth.
Well, verse 3 said, agents went out.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're an agent of the king,
Mm-hmm.
you probably are not going to argue with whoever comes around and says, if you're pretty, you're going with us.
Yeah, you're not going to fight a war over that. Well, Miss Mary is here. All right. Verse 9, and the young women pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics from Malta and her portion of food. All right. And the 7 chosen young women from the king's palace and advanced her and her women to the best place in the harem. I mean, I guess if you're going to be in a harem, being in the best places is kind of where you want to be, I guess. Again, a whole lot wrong with this, just looking at it for what it is, but for the narrative purposes, we'll see that she is shining, if you will, in this area. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of Joseph back in the day, right? Got sold into slavery by his brothers. Not a good thing that have taken place, but he's in it right now. And then he becomes Potiphar's chief slave or servant, and he excels in that job. Potiphar's wife lies about him. He's thrown into jail, and what does he do there in jail? He excels. He rises up, and he's the best guy. He's the go-to guy in the jail, which I guess is not good to be in jail, but if you got to be in jail, being the go-to guy is a good place to be. So I see a similarity there at the very least. I was talking to somebody in the congregation about they came to me for some advice. I know you would never do that because you know more than me, but they came to me for advice. And this individual said, I'm just trying to figure out my life, trying to figure out what I want to be and how I can serve the Lord the best. And I'm unhappy with my position. I'm unhappy with my place where I am right now. I have an opportunity to kind of move up maybe, but I'm nervous about that. And I kind of came back to the idea that, if you can do all that you can do where you are in this situation, and then leave it up to God and be less anxious than you currently are about this ordeal in your life. Kind of bloom where you're planted is the idea. That do the best that you can, personally and for God, despite where you are situationally, was my advice. Because they were very nervous about, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough to be pleasing to God where I am now. I want to move up to better please Him. And I go, that's kind of, yeah, I mean, looking back on it, you might be able to say that, but in the moment, just kind of do the best you can with where you are, and then things seem to work out a little bit easier for you. Okay, questions, comments? Y'all are really quiet this morning. Lisa, what is wrong? Are you okay?
Well, so far, we're muddling through.
We're muddling through. Well, that's what I love to be said about my Bible classes. We're muddling through. All right. Esther had not made known her people or kindred because Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So that she is a Jew is super secret, right? It's important for the narrative of the story. We established that really early. That's why it's here. No one knows that she is Jewish. Every day, Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So he's checking up on her, he's sending her a text message every now and again. You're doing okay? Just checking in with you, right? Okay. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus to present herself before, after being 12 months under the regulation of the women,
Yeah, as a general, we wouldn't want to wait that long.
well, Lisa said that in general it's not common for women to wait that long. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to move on from that. Since this was the regular period of their beautifying, so it took 12 months to make them pretty enough to go before the king. Again, this is almost a comedy to me at this point, given how we look at social structure today. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with spices and ointments from women. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So they go through this is not a spa, but it's kind of a spa-like treatment that takes a year to get through. I mean, again, okay, I guess. I mean, you got to have King Ahasuerus being a patient man, I guess, if he's going to be waiting around for a year to find this new queen to replace Vashti because he made a rash decision and embarrassed her in front of all the people that were present, and then she was kicked out, and he's sad. So his servants say, well, I know you're sad because you don't have a woman. Let's wait 12 months to make sure they're beautiful enough to be presented before you. George. No way. Okay, I'm not going there, George. Thanks.
He didn't want last year's model. He was waiting on this year's model.
Y'all are going to get me in a lot of trouble. I'm just going to keep saying, okay, y'all said it, not me. We'll keep reading.
That's fine. We have opinions too.
Well, I know that. Melanie.
They're probably the just her behavior.
Well, you got to know which fork to use for which dish, right? And that's very important. Like you can be offended otherwise. But yeah, for sure, the cultural issue here is the Medo-Persian Empire, not quite as big as Alexander's, but I mean, it's pretty massive. And if you're culling all the beautiful women from every culture and every place that you kind of conquer, there's going to be a lot of issues there. Okay. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem in custody of Sheshgaz. That sound good? All right. The king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubine. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Oh, okay. She's waiting for a callback. All right. If you get ghosted here, it's not good for you. All right. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, she had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king. She asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Okay, so you could basically go in and ask for anything, you get a blank check for the king. She's prudent enough to listen to the advice that she was given and say, I'm only going to ask of you that which was requested by the leader of the eunuchs who are in charge of this whole procedure. So already we kind of get an idea of her nature and her character, how discreet she is, how humble she is. That's a great character to have because we're looking to her as an example at this point, right? Any thoughts about that particular situation? This is round one. Okay. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, we all know that, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. She won. Ta-da! There's confetti, balloons popping off, strobe lights. Okay. The king gave a feast. It's worked out so well last time. Let's do it again. A great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. I mean, the people were ecstatic that he found a queen because no taxes were due that year. Can you imagine? I mean, tax breaks are great. How do you win the hearts of the people? Tax breaks. That's what we know. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not trying to look up lemma. All right. Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, where the king has his gate, where he goes in and out, right? Good place to be. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, because Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. Okay, so she is listening to the advice and the requests that are put before her by Mordecai. I would imagine that he would have some insight, being an older male figure, a father figure for her growing up. She's listening to his advice. We could ask the question, well, what did he really know about what's going on here? What was his knowledge about the culture and the time? Well, we're going to find that out. So that's why we're asking the question in a rhetorical way, right? So he's advising her on what to do, what to say, where to be, and don't let him know you're Jewish. Okay. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, so his territory, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Biblical language for they're going to throw fists and take his head off. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. So Mordecai uncovers a plot for harm to come to the king. He tattletales to Esther, who tattletales to the king in his name, right? Okay. Good to know for later. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Not our chronicles, their chronicles, right? Okay. If you've already read this book and you know the story pretty well, is that going to be significant later? Yeah, sure is, right? It just so happens he couldn't sleep one night. He needs some bedtime stories. And this is one of those stories. Okay, chapter 3. Again, this is a very unusual book to me because it reads like a novel. That's how I want to read all the Bible because it's faster that way, but this is how this one is kind of structured. Okay, chapter 3, verse 1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. Let's pause right there. Okay, so who do we have introduced here in verse 1 of chapter 3?
Who do we have introduced?
Yeah.
Did you just say Haman?
Yeah, but who is he in the narrative? He's the bad guy. Every story needs a villain, right? Okay, so Maddie is 8 now, so she's kind of got this understood at this point. But when she was little, and we tell a story, or we read a story, or we watch a movie, who does there have to be in every story for it to be compelling? A bad guy. She didn't like that part because they're bad, right? She's like, why can't they just have a story where everything goes right? I'm like, that's a very boring story. Every story ever known has always had to have some kind of stress induced into the story to make it compelling and exciting. If the good guy is always the good guy and everybody else is a good guy, it's a really boring story. So here we have the bad guy. Okay. Interestingly enough about this dude, he is an Agagite. Why is that significant? Who's Agag? Enemies of the Jews. Okay, let's rewind our brains to the first king of Israel, King Saul. All right, there were some poor decisions that were made by the king because he was king. And then the kind of third major one was he was commanded to go into this area and go and to utterly wipe out everything. Don't take their livestock, don't take their animals, just obliterate all of these people. They had been given enough time to turn back to God. They were still rebellious, and so the sentence was execution by King Saul, being his righteous instrument in the land. They went there, and what happened? Yeah, well, King Saul said, yeah, we did that. But you know, Samuel, what happened was the people, when they went in, I told them to go do what God told them to do, but they didn't do it. And so the people went in, and they found some really good animals. I mean, we're talking about some primo livestock. I mean, I'm not sure what makes it primo, but it's primo. And they took it out. And you know what? We're going to take those animals and sacrifice it to God. So win-win, you know? And Samuel's like, no. So you killed every person, though, right? Well, yeah, all of them, except for, we did take Agag, the king, prisoner, So that's close enough, right, Samuel? He goes, no. So Samuel took out a sword, and what did he do? Classic biblical phrase for young boys across the world. He hacked Agag to pieces. Because that's what God told the people to do. Saul tries to push it off on the people as if he's not the leader of the people, right? And then he says, no, that's not how we do this here. But he's an Agagite. So obviously the guy that's been hacked to pieces is not the father, but he's still the clan leader of this time. So Haman comes from that line. So we're talking about an ancient enemy of the Jews. This dude is like almost second in command in this new empire where the people are being held captive and prisoners and under the occupation of the Medo-Persian Empire. So you can kind of see there's a good guy and there's a bad guy, right? Again, classic Esther. Okay, verse 2. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had so commanded concerning him. But guess what? Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Whoops. I mean, if you don't know the story that well, this is just classic. So you've got everyone bowing down to Haman because the king of the Medo-Persian Empire says to do so. Mordecai's like, nah, ain't doing that. Okay, verse 3. Then Mordecai's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, because he had told them that he was a Jew. And so they know who he is, where he comes from, and he's not bowing down to Haman like he's a god or something. And so Haman's hearing about this now. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. Get ready to see that a whole lot. Haman gets really upset about the fact that Mordecai, being a Jew, would not bow down and pay homage like the king told him to. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So he's afraid. Classic bully. Well, I can't go by myself and bring some friends with me, right? So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews. I mean, come on. I guess, but again, this one dude won't bow down to you and pay homage to you. So you're like, I want to kill all his family and all his friends and everyone in his nation. I mean, just classic bad guy stuff, right? Okay. He's a villain. Okay. Throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes or Ahasuerus. Okay. So now we have the kind of stage set. We had the overview of looking at chapter 1 and then the beginning of chapter 2 a little bit. You got the king and all his issues and making a bad decision while he was drunk, and then kicking out Vashti, holds a beauty competition, finds Esther. She's beautiful, she's humble, she's perfect. And so Ahasuerus is like, yep, you're queen now. And then you got Mordecai, the uncle. He's like giving advice and being a politician here for the king to kind of excel where he is. Learns about a plot to kill the king, or at least harm him in some way. He reports that through the queen, Esther, and it's recorded and so on. And then Haman's introduced. He's the bad guy, and his desire is to kill all the Jews. Okay, a couple of things why that wouldn't be good. Well, first of all, it's not good for genocide, obviously. But also, in the narrative of Scripture, it seems to be significant to God that he's tracking that the certain particular Jewish people are keeping records of who comes from whom. If you wonder why it's significant, have you ever began reading the Bible at Matthew? Yeah, it's important because you kind of got to track who this Jesus guy comes from, and if you kill all the Jews, it's going to probably prevent that, right? So that's significant for the story at this point. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, we're fast-forwarding from year 7 to year 12, they cast pure, that is, lots. So the word here is going to be significant for later, right? Before Haman, day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. They're different than everybody else. Now, if you look at the structure of the Hebrew Bible, you have the Torah in the first part, the Talmud, and the instructions that are there. What you have are a bunch of rules and regulations that whenever you try to read through the Bible in a year, where does everyone get when they give up? Leviticus. I mean, come on. So you have these rules and regulations. And you might ask yourself, what's the point for us as Christians to read Leviticus? Because there's a bunch of rules and regulations that don't apply to us anymore. Well, this is one of the reasons why it's significant to read those, is because those laws are different than all the other laws that were acceptable in these ancient Near East cultures. They were distinct. They were different. And God desired them to be different than the people that were around them, right? So here is that particular lesson being applied in verse 8. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so that they may put it into the king's treasuries. So you kind of have him funding the expedition to kill all the Jews, right? Interesting. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. So he goes, sounds good. Let's fund it. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps. You might read like princes, governors, right? And to the governors over all the provinces, and to the officials of all the people, to every province in his own script, his language, and every people in his own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and was sealed with the king's signet ring. So, of course, this is the ancient medieval practice of melting the wax on the letter and you push your ring into it, right? You've seen a fantasy movie every now and again? That's what that looks like. Okay. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews. I mean, is it clear what they want to have happen? Yeah. Destroy, kill, annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. I mean, you gave them a year. Yeah, very generous. If that was not the case, then Esther would be a much shorter book. We wouldn't have anything else, right? A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the people to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. So it was a surprise regulation and law that's now being enacted here. The king and Haman are cool. They're all right. Everything's fine. But the whole place in Susa, they are losing their minds. Because what is this? What's going on here? And then chapter 4. Okay, this is where we pivot. We pan out from the king and Haman, we zoom in to Mordecai and Esther again. When Mordecai learned that all had been done, I mean, it's kind of his fault. So he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate because no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. So they're going through a kind of ritual, cultural mourning time because of the issue that's faced them. Where are you going to go? They didn't want to leave their own cities when Babylon came, so much less go somewhere else. Where are you going to go? You can't go to Egypt because they're ruled by Babylon Medo-Persian Empire too. You can't go anywhere. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Esther hears about this. She's distressed. Why? That's her dad in essence, but she's Jewish too. So the law that was just enacted is going to execute the new queen because she's Jewish and no one knows that, but she knows that. So either she can abandon her entire people and be the only one left alive and live in this lie, or she has to own up to who she really is before the king and face execution.
Well, back then she didn't know why he was
She's going to figure it out.
Until he was
Yeah.
visited. Yeah, well, the next couple verses
Yeah.
shows her continuing to question it, and Mordecai then told
Okay.
her via,
And that's where we'll get next week, Lord willing. Okay. All right. It's all downhill from here, folks, when it comes to the reading of the scripture here, because the story picks up and it goes and it goes and it goes and it goes, and there's a big finale at the end. And so we'll pick up here, Lord willing, next week in the book of Esther. This is old hat to you. I apologize for reading it through together, but some of you have never heard this story before in its entirety, so I want to kind of give you the full experience here. So if you want to keep reading from chapter 4 and kind of preview what's happening next week, that might be wise for you to do. Okay. Thank you so much for your time and your attention now. We'll be dismissed for about 18 minutes before worship.